Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sweatpants BI. It's me, Sean, here. One thing that I am really excited to do with this YouTube channel in 2023 is to start getting some examples of Power BI projects from the community on LinkedIn, on YouTube, basically anywhere that you can reach me, so that I can start using some actual physical Power BI work to sort of walk through, some things that I see that people are doing exceptionally well in Power BI and maybe propose some areas of feedback, areas of improvement, or maybe point out some things that are less than ideal from a technique perspective. And fortunately for this video, I was able to get a head start on this new series of YouTube videos that I see myself releasing on Sweatpants BI because a gentleman on LinkedIn named Manan and whose name I am probably butchering in terms of pronunciation, connected with me, reached out, asked if I would be willing to review some of his projects on his NoviPro account. I said, no problem. As a matter of fact, I've been thinking about doing this on a more regular basis. And so Manon actually sent me an example of a Power BI project that he wanted me to take a look at. You can see it here, and you can probably also already tell that it kind of looks amazing. And so, Manon sent me this Power BI project, said, Sean, I would love to get some feedback on it. As soon as I opened it up, I was like, why do you need my feedback? This thing's a work of art. But the more that I thought about it, the more I thought, hey, even works of art are fine for this series of YouTube videos. I can, pull up Manon's report, show you some things that he did exceptionally well, and maybe point out some very nitpicky stuff where Manon could possibly improve this Power BI project if you wanted to revisit it. And at the very least, I can give you, the viewer of this YouTube video, some tips on, things that really work well in Power BI, things that you should always keep in mind on every single Power BI project, and also point out some just really small things that can be the difference, between a Power BI report being an A- Power BI project and an A+ Power BI project. A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about on Manon's piece are just those last minute little things that can really close out a Power BI project and just take it that one little step further. So can't wait to dive in, show you Manon's work. Again, he has a lot to be proud of here. My first reaction upon opening this up was, man, he really knows his way around Power BI, and I would honestly be pretty stoked if I had created this Power BI project. So let's go ahead and pull it up. And first, I just want to start focusing on all the stuff that he did great. And then I'm going to cover, maybe 7 or 8 things that he could keep in mind that would just make this Power BI project even more impressive. So here we are in Manon's Power BI project. I just went ahead and opened up the actual PBIX file since he was kind enough to share that with me. And this was a competition entry. You can see that it was focused on providing insights to an executive team in a telecom domain. I actually couldn't even begin to guess how to pronounce the name of said telecom company. Let's go with Atlico. I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine. And this is an annual growth report, pretty straightforward. And right out of the gate, the first thing that I noticed that Manon did an absolutely fantastic job with is just his overall presentation. I mean, just we can clearly see the key metrics here at the top. We can see the name of the report. It looks like there's a separate section here that's sort of a city-based analysis. I really like the way that he has this sort of side section organized. Every block in his storytelling, has its own titles. And what I mean by block is just like a collection of text and data visuals. So this first block here at the top looks like it's focused on revenue analysis. The next one is focused on users analysis. And then there's plan revenue analysis at the bottom. Now, I don't know anything about this data set. I don't know anything about this company. Really, I don't know anything about any of the measures that are in here. So there's not going to be a lot of feedback that I'm providing here on like DAX calculations, whether or not he presented this data in the most effective way. That's kind of outside of the scope of what I'm talking about here. I'm going to be very focused on just the design elements, since, I don't have, frankly, I don't have enough time to actually dig into all of the data in this, and, try to propose a better way of presenting the data. But from a design perspective, as far as the overall presentation that Manon has provided us here, I can say that right out of the gate, he's just knocked it out of the park. If somebody on my team, put this report together, it would get an automatic thumbs up from me. And one of the questions that I ask myself anytime somebody from my network sends me a Power BI report to ask what I think about it, the first question that I ask myself is, would I hire this individual based strictly on the design and layout of the Power BI tool? And this is an emphatic yes. Everything that Manon has done here is very clean, very deliberate, follows a lot of best practices in terms of laying out just your overall design of a Power BI report. He checks a lot of boxes. As far as the overall staging and layout of the report, some best practices include, having the key metrics presented first at the top, which of course he's got that. Key metrics tend to sort of frame and contextualize a lot of the other information in the report, especially if you were presenting this, to some executives. You would want to give those executives a place to start where they could actually find the most important numbers, and then you use the rest of the report to make whoever is looking at this report care about those numbers. So he's got the key metrics here at the top. That's fantastic. From there, because obviously this report has a lot of information and it's a lot to digest, another really smart thing that you can do to make that information more digestible is to sort of break it out into chapters, just like in a book. And so the blocks that I referred to earlier, this revenue analysis, user analysis, and planned revenue analysis, those might as well be the chapters in his book. And then the city-based analysis section that he has over here could even be considered like another chapter or an aside. But at any rate, you want to create these sort of subheaders or sections within your page, within your Power BI report, just to make everything sort of chunked out, and so that users don't have to worry about consuming everything in one go. They can sort of, absorb all of the rich information in this Power BI report piece by piece. So overall, I really like the way that Manon is presenting everything here. I really like the before and after technique that he has here. That in particular is a very, very smart technique for sort of contextualizing, information in a report. And I think that this information, based on my understanding of the data, is sort of structured around, looking at measures before and after the implementation of a 5G plan or something along those lines. And so I think that, this before and after framing of the story is probably a really smart technique for this data set. And you can see that he's carrying this theme, before and after throughout his entire report. And, I think that again, just works in the context of this data set. I would probably have set things up the same way. Getting into some more aesthetic elements of this Power BI report that Manon has implemented very, very well. One thing that stands out to me is contrast. Basically, is there enough balance between dark and light colors that everything is pretty easy to read? I'm going to focus a little bit more on readability here in just a moment, but generally speaking, I think that Manon has a nice amount of contrast throughout this report. Anytime there's white or very light text, it's usually propped up against sort of a darker color that makes that white text easy to read. As the gradients that Manon is using in the background, as they sort of fade into lighter colors, you can tell that Manon immediately and shrewdly switches the color of his font and text to sort of these darker tones to make sure that they're as readable as possible. All of these are tried and true techniques that Manon implements very, very well. There might be a couple of areas in here where we're seeing some light text color used against lighter background colors that are starting to maybe get a little bit out of balance from a contrast perspective. But speaking in just, generalizations, I think that that Manon has actually implemented color pretty effectively throughout this report. I'm going to outline, because color is so sort of important in data visualization and sort of central to my approach and how I design Power BI reports. I'm going to focus on that a little bit more when I get to suggestions that I would make to improve this report. But by and large, I think that what Manon has done here is very successful. I also just want to commend Manon and his design here for just overall creativity. So there are some techniques in here that really show close attention to detail, that show some originality, and just obviously a testament to Manon being very deliberate in how he's presenting all of this information, which is exactly what you want. One of the most frustrating types of reports that people send me to review are reports that I can tell they threw together in 15 or 20 minutes. If it would take me as long to provide you feedback on a report or longer to provide you feedback on a report than the amount of time that you invested into building the report or trying to tell a story, then it's probably too soon for me to give you the sorts of meaningful feedback that I like to give people. I'm not worried about that in this case. I can tell that Manon spent a lot of time thinking about how he was going to tell this story and how he was going to present it and how to present it in an engaging and creative manner. And I cannot tell you how much I respect that, especially if you're newer or just sort of starting your data visualization journey. Figuring out creative ways to present data and to tell a story is honestly the most challenging part of the job. Anybody can learn how to build line charts and build bar charts, but learning how and when to switch up some of the presentations of those data visuals is something that honestly just comes with patience and practice. For example, we see here that for these line charts and lollipop charts that Manon looks like he's trying to kind of merge together. He has actually switched what would normally be an x-axis below this family or series of charts here. And he's created his own surrogate x-axis up here at the top that identifies the different months in this time frame. I actually think that the way he is presenting this was a very shrewd decision, and a very effective way of sort of mixing up the expectations here for these data visuals. I can't actually promise Manon that this isn't an idea that I won't steal in the future. But at any rate, I can definitely tell that he tried to do some creative things with all of his data visuals on this report. Even it looks like scatter plot or line chart that he used to create this visual down here is not something that I know comes right out of the box in Power BI. He had to think about how he was going to present this, and he just got creative with the techniques that he combined to tell the specific data visual story that he wanted to. And of course, he even leaves us a note here saying, hover over the dots to learn more about a city, which we can do, and it's really nice that he also thought to give just that little morsel of instruction on how to get more out of the data visuals that he's giving us. All of those are pro techniques for any Power BI developer. Great job, Manon. And as we continue to scroll down through here, another visual that he created that just immediately got my attention is this wonderful heat map that he created down here. That also, just shows taking a data visual that is built into Power BI. In this case, you can tell that he's using the matrix visual and just doing something a little bit different with it. And in this case, he took the matrix visual and used, conditional formatting on some type of measure to create this really cool heat map that is sort of guiding us towards, concentrations for this particular measure by the different plans before and after 5G. Again, I don't know much more about this data than you do, so whether or not he's using the most effective measure, can't really say. But at any rate, the data visual is immediately eye-catching, and I really like the way that he has attempted to tell us a little bit more about the takeaways that we should be reaching from this data visual in each section, just to sort of help us not just follow the gradient here that's being created by the conditional formatting, but also give us reasons to care about the stronger concentrations of color across this heat map. And as far as the last item that he included here that is really cool, the city-based analysis. I use this technique all the time, where I'll use kind of a different background color and aesthetic to sort of take maybe a subset of the data and sort of set it apart from the rest of the report. So in this case, even though we're still using some of the same measures like total revenue, average ARPU, average active users, measures that kind of carry throughout the rest of the report. In this section, he's taking kind of a subset of the data. In this instance, he's taking a particular focus on some of the larger metro cities. And he's just carrying over some of these key metrics and looking at them for the top and bottom four cities in the data set, which I think is a really cool idea. And this is exactly the sort of focus section that I would probably build into any report that I'm designing. So, really, really cool section to sort of digest over here. I really like the way that he has presented it. Overall, again, Manon, if I had to give you a score, out of 10, I'd probably give this like, an 8 or 9 out of 10. I think there's a ton of really good ideas that are carried out very successfully here. Now comes the part where I'm going to get into some of the suggestions that I might make to Manon to carry this report just a little bit further. A lot of these are going to be incredibly nitpicky things that are borderline going to make you think, man, Sean's really a jerk in the feedback that he gives, as far as they're going to be such minute things that you're going to wonder why you should even care about them. But in my experience, these tiny little final details are the things that that can just sort of carry a report from being very effective to being just that extra amount of dare I say, masterful Power BI building. These are just little tiny attention to detail things that are fortunately really easy for us to fix and just basically amount to that little extra bit of polish on our Power BI reports. So the first thing that I want to focus on in Manon's work here is readability. Readability is one of the most important concepts in Power BI or any kind of data visualization or report building. It doesn't matter if you're using Power BI, Tableau, or even Excel. If we're developing data tools, we want to make sure that anyone who is accessing this report can easily read it. And there are a number of different ways to approach the readability problem in report building. Readability can refer to accessibility. Do you have enough contrast in the colors that you're using, and are you using effective colors to where anybody who is consuming the information in this report, even if they suffer from any of the different varieties of color blindness, they're able to read everything that you have here? What I want to focus on, since I already mentioned that overall, I think that Manon has done a pretty good job with having enough contrast in here to make this a more or less safe, web-safe report. I want to focus on a more literal sense of readability, and that is like, are the font sizes large enough? In particular, I focus on this middle section over here in the city-based analysis, where some of our fonts get really teeny tiny. They're pretty small on my fairly large monitor that I use on my personal computer. If I were reading this on my work laptop, I'm not sure that I would even be able to read this revenue percent growth or ARPU percent growth. And honestly, my immediate reaction is I'm not quite sure why these labels are smaller than the labels that we have on either side of them. Maybe Manon is trying to draw attention to the fact that total revenue as a measure here is more important than the revenue percent growth. And that might be fair. But if that is the case, then my suggestion might be to make revenue percent growth larger and then make total revenue even larger than that. So that, since font size can be a really powerful tool in getting users to look at one number before they look at another number, because we tend to be drawn towards things that are larger or more vibrant, like white colors as opposed to darker colors in this context. You can use font size to kind of tell a user, hey, you need to look at this number before you look at this number that has a smaller label. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's just kind of a psychological trick that we can use. But at any rate, you want to make sure that your font is large enough that anybody can read it, regardless of their contact lens prescription, or just how they how we perceive numbers in different spaces. And I know that was pretty vague, but here's another tip that I give people when they're trying to figure out which font size to use, especially since this tool was designed to provide insights to an executive team in the telecom domain. let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone who is presenting a Power BI project in an executive boardroom. And I have been in this exact situation myself, and this is not a fun place to be. But let's say that you have spent hours, if not days, if not weeks, building this really amazing analysis in Power BI, and you're in the executive boardroom. You're getting ready to present this to the CEO, and all the other bigwigs of your company. And your Power BI report is put up on this huge screen, via projector, and immediately, because your Power BI report is being emitted via a projector instead of pulled up on like a gigantic computer screen or a gigantic television, the projector loses some of this detail. And then, of course, that also depends on the lighting in the room. But I found myself in a position where I was, basically projecting a Power BI report onto a huge screen in the executive boardroom. We had basically one entire wall of the room was a huge window. There was all kinds of additional light pouring in, and all of the little font in my Power BI report was impossible for the CEO to read. Because where was the CEO sitting? Not by the projector screen. He was sitting at the very end of a long executive table, basically farther away from the projector screen than every other person in that room. So, in that situation, the most important person in the room was the least able to read the smaller font on my Power BI report. So I'm not saying that you always need to make all of your fonts gigantic. It depends on audience to audience. But it has served me well in terms of making sure that I never have another awkward situation like that, to always take a Power BI report that I'm presenting and imagine that I could be presenting this in the executive boardroom of my company to a CEO who is sitting on the far side of the room, and then ask myself, could I or the CEO make out this text, from the other side of a room, if I were in that situation? If your answer to that is no, you probably need to bump up your font size. And that's all I'm going to say about font size. The other thing that other things that you want to do that can just make your reports a little bit more readable is, if you have, longer numbers, make sure that you format them appropriately and include commas where necessary. Obviously, when we're dealing with a number like 3,187, it's not that hard to, read that number and understand that it's, just a little over 3,000. But if you're presenting a lot of numbers, and as these numbers get progressively larger, it can be hard for somebody to immediately tell the difference between, say, 1 million and 10 million, or 10 million and 100 million. Adding commas to our numbers just makes them that, little bit more readable. It results in fewer, milliseconds that people have to spend focusing on a number to make sure that they're reading it correctly. Building data visualization tools and building, presentations like this challenge scenario that are intended to be consumed by executives. It's a game of real estate and a game of time management. Basically, we want to be able to present as many insights, as many important insights as possible, and in as small amount of time as possible. And so we want to make sure that everything is formatted correctly. The commas are where they should be. We don't want important people in our audience to have to spend unnecessary amounts of time deciphering, what a number is, what a number means. We want everything to be able to be processed as quickly as possible. On that same note, another thing that Manan did in here that might just be something he overlooked, or it could be something that I overlooked, obviously, since I kind of ran through his report relatively quickly in preparing for this meeting, is I could not for the life of me figure out what ARPU stands for. Maybe you're watching this video right now and you're seeing where ARPU is spelled out. But I've run through this report a couple of times now, and I still can't figure out what ARPU stands for. Maybe this is a acronym that in other areas, maybe in like financial areas or in telecom, it'd be obvious what ARPU stands for. Maybe it's such a common acronym. But for my money, anytime you use an acronym in a Power BI report, or even a PowerPoint presentation, you should always make sure that you spell out that acronym the first time. In this instance, since we have all of our key metrics here, and ARPU is at the very top of the page where it's highly visible and people are very likely to look here first. This is probably where I would have just spelled out average, whatever ARPU stands for the first time, and then maybe put ARPU in parentheses, sort of telling the user that from here on out, I'm just going to say ARPU instead of spelling out the same thing over and over again. So and the last thing I'm going to say on readability is anytime you have acronyms, make sure that no one is left guessing or has to Google what an acronym stands for. The next thing that I'm going to focus on is I'm going to start talking a little bit more about Manan's use of color. And so let's talk about first this city-based analysis section over here. Manan introduces a couple of colors here. We have orange for the 60%, and orange is a great, vibrant, warm color. As soon as I open this report, my eyes are immediately drawn to the 60% because of that bright, vibrant orange and the fact that it's not visible anywhere else in the report. I don't see that particular orange anywhere. So my eyes immediately go to around 60% of all the revenue and active users are concentrated in the big 5 metro cities. No problem there. We also introduced this light blue for revenue and active users. We have this green here for market share, and we have this red here for dropped by approximately 1%. This kind of pinkish red, that'd be pretty common. And I can probably draw a correlation here between, using this red color here with the same color being used for all of these negative values, scrolling down through this section. The thing is I'm not really completely sure what I'm supposed to take away from the green being used for market share and the light blue being used for revenue and active users. My brain starts looking for other places where these colors are used to sort of draw some kind of parallel. Like, since this market share is kind of a green, am I supposed to be linking this with, this section over here? There's kind of a through line here between these greens. And for the revenue and active users, am I supposed to be like following this to other blue areas? It starts to get kind of confusing. If it were me, instead of introducing all of these other colors that sort of confuse the story, this orange is very effective as far as kind of pulling attention. I might have just used this orange to highlight all of this sentence. Around 60% of all the revenue and active users are concentrated in the big 5 metro cities. That entire sentence sounds pretty important. And then, for the next sentence, I probably wouldn't have highlighted market share, but I might have highlighted just the dropped by approximately 1%. Or, you could have just carried this red font across all of this and say the overall market share has dropped by approximately 1%. So you're using kind of an orange here to call out something important, and you're using this red here that corresponds with the other negative growth values down here to sort of call out, hey, some of these numbers are dropping, and it could be a cause for concern in the long run, which is exactly what Manan points out in the rest of that sentence. But just saying, something that I focus on in a lot of my videos is you'll often hear me say that very rarely should we be using more than 2 or 3 colors in a Power BI report. And anytime we exceed that number, there ought to be a really, really good reason for it. And I'm not sure that when we introduce this light blue and this green that we've really made a very convincing case for introducing new colors. So if we have a section where we find ourselves suddenly introducing colors that aren't used in other sections of the report, I would really challenge myself to try to figure out a way to eliminate those colors or to at least incorporate them in a more deliberate manner. The same can even be said for this sort of gold dashed line here. My initial reaction is I'm not sure that is necessary at all, as far as you're sort of creating a useless border here between a description that goes with all of the rest of the visuals here. So if it were me, I probably just would have scrapped this gold dashed line or just made it like gray. If you're, this is one of those where, Sean's opinion on this isn't necessarily the only or best opinion here. I would probably just lose the line entirely. But at any rate, color is always one of the most powerful attributes that we use in any kind of report that we build. Color always pulls our attention. We're always drawn to color. And this sort of gold partition here, I'm not sure that it serves any purpose, and I'm definitely not confident that it needs to have any kind of color. So I probably just would have made it, kind of a gray tone, or maybe even just a slightly lighter tone than what we're using in the background here. But again, don't want to go too far there. While we're sort of focusing on the concept of color here, when we're building these huge infographics, balancing color is just a challenge. Any way that you put it, even here in this heat map that I really liked, I noticed that Manan is pretty much using the same blue that we're using in this section. Well, meanwhile, this heat map is still divided into before 5G and after 5G. So is carrying this color of blue that we're really only using in the before 5G sections, is that appropriate? Is that the way that we should be presenting this visual? Or should we start to play with some of our green colors in the after 5G section of this visual just for consistency purposes? Things like this are sort of the questions that we have to ask. Color is a really complex subject and really difficult to sort of execute well. In a Power BI report, sometimes you have to make trade-offs, sometimes you have to make sacrifices, and all of that is totally valid. But another thing that, if I were talking to Manan in person about this report, and if we were on the phone with each other and he was asking for my feedback, I might even suggest asking the question, what is more important in the revenue? Is it in this report? Are we interested in having people focus on the revenue before 5G or the revenue after 5G section? And the same can be said for all of these sections that sort of break down before 5G and after 5G. If the area that we really want people to focus on is the after 5G section, then you might consider just reserving more of your color for the after 5G section. And every time I build a Power BI report, I have to make some kind of choice in what I think is most important for the user to focus on first. So we're using blue and kind of a light green here. Personally, my eyes are kind of drawn to the green because it's maybe just a little bit warmer tonally than the blue. But I think we're starting to run into a situation where does the blue need any color at all? Would we lose any information if we just reserved color to sort of spotlight or highlight the revenue after 5G section? And if we just used gray and different shades of gray over here in the before 5G section? Again, anytime we use color, that is where a user is going to be drawn, and it's probably where they're going to spend more time consuming information. So if the after 5G sections are where we really want our users to spend more time focusing, and we're just kind of having the before 5G information here for comparison purposes, then whatever you just want your user to be able to reference for comparison's sake, that's probably information that you can just present in gray. It may not even necessitate having any kind of color flourishes at all. So, I think that the green here is totally valid. I might have even picked a warmer color than green. I hesitate to say something quite as warm as the orange. But something that would really, grab the user's gaze and pull them directly to this middle section of the report to sort of say, hey, this is where you should really be focusing a lot of your attention. And let's say that Manan said, Sean, I'm going to completely ignore your advice on that. I really like the blue. I really like the green. No problem. Again, I don't want to be too prescriptive here. The advice that I'm giving here is very, very much staked in my own kind of aesthetic preferences. So, like I said, if Manan presented this to me, I still would have said he knocked this out of the park. I'm just sort of skeptical that there needs to be color here. But since Manan has introduced, this blue theme for before 5G and this sort of green theme for after 5G, then, I start to go over here to the city-based analysis, and I start to wonder why we're not carrying the same color theme over here to this section where suddenly, we're using kind of light blue for before 5G and after 5G. So I did pull up Manon's PowerPoint that he used to create his design, and I just quickly mocked up, a concept that he could have used in his background to sort of carry over the same color themes that he used in these sections, but apply them to the city-based analysis that he was using. You can see that before he was using kind of these dark grays. Again, I think that's totally fine. And, I could have spent a lot more time, developing an alternative solution here. But, there could have been other techniques that Manan could have used to carry over the same thematic colors that he used in this section over to this section by carrying over like the blue and the green for the before and after 5G. Again, just a suggestion. Overall, I think that what Manan has presented here is very effective. He also could have just literally carried over the green for his labels here and had a similar effect. So let's go ahead and see if I can get that to work. You can see that that green is a little bit light. We can go up to our color options in PowerPoint. We can sort of brighten that up a little bit. If we want it to sort of carry over, the light blue and the green from over here, we also could have just gone to our eyedropper and grabbed a green here that way. All of that is totally fine. I'm just trying to hammer home that, once you settle on colors for different aspects of your Power BI reports, make sure that you're consistently implementing those colors everywhere else in your report. And that you're also always making sure that you're sort of balancing your contrast. Because obviously by introducing this gradient, I've kind of muddied up some of these other colors and made them a little bit more difficult to read. So if I were putting this gradient in the background of this section to sort of carry over the blue and green, I would also want to make sure that I revisit all of my font colors here, make things larger if they need to, make the colors darker if they need to be, so that everything is as readable as possible. Another really cool idea that Manan has here is sort of allowing us to compare the top 4 cities and the bottom 4 cities in this section. I really like this idea because I live in Kentucky, and admittedly I'm less familiar with geography on the Indian subcontinent. A really cool idea that might have been something that Manan could implement here if he thought that he was going to have a very international audience of this report is, we could have taken all of the numbers and measures here and maybe scrunched this text over just a little bit. And we could have even, for each of these little cards, embedded like a transparent image or SVG of India to sort of, pinpoint, where everything is located. Looks like I need to drag this up. I think this was intended to be Bombay. We could have also gotten creative by just like adding a quick reference of a map of India that sort of highlights, where each city that we're talking about is actually located, within the country. Obviously, if we know that all of our users of this report are living in India, then this is probably not necessary. This is totally just a Sean suggestion to sort of make all of this information just visually a little bit more engaging, and to also say, hey, maybe take mercy on the poor American that is trying to remember or make context of where all of these cities are located within your broader data story. Totally just an idea there, food for thought again. Another thing that we would want to always make sure that we do before we send a Power BI report out into the wild is, my guess is that when Manan was designing this Power BI report, he probably was zoomed out a little bit to try to get all of this rich detail laid out perfectly. And notice this revenue analysis section. Everything looks super clean. And I like how everything is perfectly lined up, right? Well, notice that we're currently at 80% zoom. Anytime you're making a layout like in PowerPoint or presumably any other design tools, you're always going to make sure that before you publish, you view the background or the layout at 100%. so that you can see that at 100%, the revenue analysis, this line here is not perfectly lined up with this other sort of rounded rectangle that has what appears to be like a dollar sign icon. And this is actually the version that made it into Manon's Power BI report. When I first opened it up, one of the first things I noticed was that this line is not perfectly lined up with this rounded rectangle. And we could honestly just go in and manually grab that line and just drop it down a pixel so that everything is perfectly flush. But those are also just last minute details that you might want to make sure that you're knocking out before you actually publish a report. And again, my guess is that Manan probably didn't go back and look at his layout at 100% zoom before he published. And as we continue to go down through the report, you'll even notice some other sections here. Like the line below users analysis is not perfectly lined up with the rounded rectangle here for users. So we're going to drop that down by 2 pixels, make sure that it's perfectly aligned, and it is. And you might also notice just, again, I know that I'm getting into a little very gestalt, techniques that most people aren't going to notice, but they do kind of stand out to me, is that we have more space here between revenue before 5G and revenue after 5G than we have between revenue after 5G and the section that calls out his cities. So we would probably want to manually select all of those shapes, go to our arrange section and just distribute them horizontally to make sure that the spacing is identical between these large color blocks. Because especially when you're using big shapes that all have different colors, the differences in spacing tend to stand out just that little bit more. And then, of course, we can take everything else and just multi-select it and sort of drag it back into place. Because I know that it looks like he intended to have this revenue call out and this ARPU call out perfectly flush with the right side of this revenue after 5G rectangle. All good, we can do that pretty easily. But those are just some of the finishing touches on a Power BI report that just make things look a little bit more polished. And then a couple of other just very, very small items that I did notice in Manon's report, that if you were building a report based on this data set, you might want to go through and just ask yourself, other just a little attention to detail moments. I noticed that the plans on his heat map here appear to be ordered alphabetically, and that is, probably fine in the context of this data, but my mind wants to put everything in numeric order. In other words, my brain keeps wanting to put everything in order by P1, P2, 3, 4, all the way to 9, and then have 10, 11, 12, 13 come after P9. Ordering fields in Power BI can be a little bit tricky if you've not done a lot of it. So what we would probably have to do here is I noticed that he has this dim plan table, and we can go and look at it, dim plan. And because of this P, this is being evaluated as a text string. What we would want to do is either go into the actual data or just create a new DAX column here. And we're basically going to want to have a plan order column here that would just kind of be a row count, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 13. Just a numeric column that contains, the proper numbers for each of these. You could also just have a column that literally just drops the P from the plan column, and it would be just fine. Then Manon could have, specified that he wanted his plan column to actually sort by this plan order column that I'm talking about that obviously we didn't create, so it doesn't exist yet. But that way he would have a numeric column to order his plan column by, and that way this the rows in this matrix would be labeled in numeric order by the plan number instead of in alphabetical order, which I'm wondering if maybe Manon didn't know about that trick. Maybe he's a little bit newer to Power BI on that front. But even though the distinctions here between P1, P10, P11, maybe those distinctions are fairly meaningless, in my mind, everything should probably be ordered on this axis by the actual number of the plan. So those are just sort of some of the finishing touches that I would make. one of the closing observations that I would make about this report, and also about sort of the prevalency of these Power BI challenges that are being carried out by different companies, is I do feel like a lot of young Power BI users are being kind of nudged in this direction of making these very complex infographics. And these tend to be very cool. They tell very, captivating stories, and they're really fun to share on LinkedIn and stuff. But, if I were actually creating, a Power BI report based on this data for an executive team, I might be a little bit hesitant to just drop this much information in their laps all in one view. So the closing bit of feedback that I would provide on this Power BI report is, an infographic is, like I said, great for LinkedIn, great for these challenges. I have a ton of fun building them, but they're not always the most effective way of presenting information, especially very complex information. So, if I were actually building this report and releasing it into the wild and not just participating in a Power BI competition, I would probably consider using something like Power BI bookmarks, or even just creating different pages and sort of having a central navigation hub to sort of make this information a little bit easier to digest. At the end of the day, a lot of the executives that we work under at our respective companies are very busy people. They don't live in the data, and they need to be able to sort of compartmentalize information and consume it in little, morsels one at a time. So, instead of laying everything out as a huge vertical infographic, if I were actually building a report on this data in the real world, I would probably use these subheadings like revenue analysis, users analysis, plan revenue analysis, and city-based analysis. I would probably create like 4 bookmarks to sort of let users, go through those different story elements one at a time, instead of just, laying everything all out on the page at one time. Now, of course, for Manon's purposes, this was probably the nature of the challenge. He was probably required to build like a one pager. So obviously, I can't hold Manon accountable for that. I'm sure that Manon checked all the boxes on this and obviously kicked butt on this competition. But a takeaway for somebody who's looking at this for feedback for a real Power BI report that they're building for their own real company would probably be to organize all of this information a little bit differently, and ask yourself whether or not a vertical one pager is really appropriate for the scope of the information and the audience that we're presenting this information to. I would probably go the route of either organizing it into multiple pages or using bookmarks to let users just consume one storytelling element at a time. And another benefit of doing that is, because we're consuming all of this information differently, it's going to open back up some of the space that we have lost by trying to cram everything into one page. So, this before 5G and after 5G sections, if we were doing, using bookmarks or page navigation, we could really utilize the entire page or an entire landscape section to sort of make our fonts larger, maybe introduce some more, techniques to sort of help make the most important aspects of the data pop even more than they currently are. And, just give ourselves a little bit more real estate to make sure that anybody who's reading this report, they're immediately drawn to the most important aspects of the data, and that they're going to leave with the conclusions that they should be making from this data. But all of that said, Manon, once again, congratulations on building what is still really a phenomenal Power BI report, and definitely the kind of report that is immediately eye-catching to me, the kind of report that I frankly aspire to build myself and aspire for everyone who works on my team to build. I'm beyond impressed, because I believe you told me that you're somewhat newer to Power BI, or at the very least you've started your Power BI journey a little bit more recently than maybe some other people that are watching these videos. And you are to be commended with your ideas, your creativity, and your presentation sensibilities in this report. Huge thumbs up on this report. Manon, I hope that you found the feedback that I have for this report useful. I hope that you take the feedback that I'm giving you that you find valuable and that you think you can really act upon. I hope you take that feedback and start kind of incorporating it into your future builds and that you use it to just get better. And if I said some things that you feel like don't work for you, that is totally fine. We're all on different journeys when it comes to data visualization and storytelling. And at the end of the day, every single one of us is going to have to develop our own aesthetic and design sensibilities that work for us. I hope that I'm not just creating, an army of, Sean Chandler developers out there. I'm hoping that you're all just cherry picking the ideas that I have that you feel like really speak to you and work for you, and that they're going to make you a better Power BI developer. That's really my goal here. If you have a Power BI report that you would love to see evaluated in a similar forum to this, by all means, send it over. I cannot promise that I'm going to be very fast in getting that feedback. Manan, I'm sure will happily tell you that it took me about 3 weeks to get this video together from the time that he sent it to me, sent this report to me. And that is just because obviously I do have a day job that takes up a lot of my work. This YouTube channel is really just a side hustle that I do for fun. And so I'm not going to break any appointments to get that feedback, but I do enjoy evaluating these Power BI reports. I would love for any future Power BI reports to be in worse shape than this one so that I have more to talk about. Again, Manan did a remarkable job, and I'm really looking for people that are newer to Power BI, people that are just starting to kind of find their rhythm in building Power BI reports. Those are really the ones that I'm hoping to offer more feedback on. But I would love for you to just hit me up on LinkedIn. Send me any examples that you have. If you have a showcase or portfolio on Novi Pro, on Maven Analytics, whatever, happy to give you some feedback on those reports. I hope that now that I'm saying this, I'm not just inundated with way more reports than I can handle. If I can't get you feedback in a Sweatpants BI YouTube video, hopefully I can at least give you some feedback on LinkedIn by just writing to you directly. But I would love to be doing more of these videos in 2023. Thank you so much for tuning in to Sweatpants BI. Can't wait to hopefully see you in the new year. Hope you have a happy new year. For me, it's the day after Christmas and about 19 degrees outside. So I hope 19 degrees Fahrenheit. So I hope you're all keeping warm. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you had a great one. To everyone else out there who's celebrating different holidays, hope you had a wonderful opportunity to celebrate with your family. Let's get 2023 started off for a great new year, and I will see you in future Sweatpants Power BI videos in 2023. Thank you so much.